Good evening, friends. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar. This is Anil.
Hi, everyone. It's Kamal.
So, Kamal, we're going to talk about ageism in workplace, right?
Absolutely.
So, can we acknowledge the elephant in the room?
I'm not getting older. If you're referring to me, no, not at all.
No, there are two 46, 47-year-old guys. And surely, we have vested interest in this topic, isn't it?
I don't think so. I think it's up to you as to how you define your age. So I still think at 46.
Age is a number?
Age is a number.
Okay.
Nothing beyond that.
Okay, let's begin. So this conversation keeps coming up, Kamal. How, what is the age, where we get old? That's 40, 45, 50?
Keeps changing, I guess. I think 40 is like, really pressing the alarm button. But just because few people felt aged at 40 or got pushed out at 45 or 50, I really don't know whether we can call that. But we have heard people, after a long time, almost 2 decades in the recruitment industry, for the first time in the last few years, we have heard things about age, and that's precisely the reason we are having this conversation today, isn't it?
True. So can we look at how and when this conversation started? Actually, how long back did this conversation begin in the corporate world?
I think so. It's worthwhile exploring because if you want to look at that, I think it's also important to look at the context of aging. Aging referring to the individual,
right,
on one side, and referring at an organization context, what does aging mean?
Right. So for an individual, Kamal, when we look at talent side of it, we would look at aging from a context of skills being stagnant. Number one. Number two, physically getting older, and cognitive ability. You tend to lose on your sharpness. You get to lose that as you age. This is from a talent's perspective. What is it from an organization perspective?
What comes to the mind is how the organizational dimensions measure let's say where you fit in the hierarchy is one element. I think in today's world where cost pressures are very high, the cost of the role also is a significant dimension. Most importantly, I think is a matter of skill supply. I remember distinctly in one of the organizations I worked when we had a CFO who was of a certain age, 55 had to quote, and we realized that an organization which was relatively young looked like there was an issue of fitting in, and of course there was always this thing that HR always used to say that, look, this guy is not fitting in, can we get a younger CFO?
Right.
And the larger aspect was not about the age, it was about fitting in.
Right.
Very clearly, he was a competent guy. He ticked all the boxes, qualified. He was the most hardworking guy. So his body function was not giving up in that way. I think culturally, our organization, which had an average age of 29, the leadership age, which was 35, all these things felt that, age was about, in his case, was about not fitting in.
Right. So just going a step back, Kamal, looking at why this conversation even started out, I think the startup wave has to an extent accentuated this conversation, isn't it? That has accentuated the the conversation, isn't it? Because we have been in recruiting for last, let's say, 2 decades, and the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen this conversation about age coming up more often than before. So that's one of the things that I see. Second, I see that if you look at the demographics of the country, the median age is 28, right? So anybody who's on the wrong side of, let's say, 40 would be definitely looked at as somebody, who may find it difficult to fit in, in the workplace. So it's in that context that this conversation has come about, and that's how we are examining it, isn't it?
I think the timing of this is very important. The way I look at it is, why I go back to where we started, whether it is 40, 45, 50. The 40 element, Anil, according to me, started when the startups actually, started to make waves.
Right.
We heard that there were 25-something, 30-something CEOs raising $1 billion kind of valuation. and wanting to hire people of a certain age group, that's when the age almost shrunk at 40, in my view. Another point of context was about when the IT services companies started to feel the pressure of margins. And they said, look, we have developed a huge middle layer. And those middle layer were nothing but people who are in the age of 45 or so, 20 years experience, project managers. We don't need managers.
Yeah, they were in the people management role.
Absolutely.
So, they were trying to delayer this.
And they also thought they were trying to make space for individual contributors where automation was coming in, where age came into play, in my view. Clearly, I think the shifting demographics related to talent supply in a country like India is another major shift, in my view, where we feel that we can get people of a certain kind. So that's where I think this, when the startup wave, the IT services companies feeling the pressure and trying to look at a certain age group as somebody whom they didn't want. All these things put together, I think, has brought this number between 40 to 50 somewhere. We are saying that number not because that's how it happened, also because it seems that exactly at that point is when the company started to feel the pressure.
I also want to bring about this conversation about MIT having done a research, Kamal. They published it in 2018, beginning of 2018, and they surveyed about 2.6 million entrepreneurs in the US. This is between 2007 and 14. And surprisingly, they found that the founders who were in the 40s were most likely to have a successful exit. So on one side, we are saying that there is a challenge, but there is also data to prove that people in their 40s are also valuable, and people who started companies are likely to be successful even in their mid 40s.
Yeah, I've read about that, study about entrepreneurs, and it gives me a great comfort to know that we have started a company when in our mid 40s. But more than that, I look at the personal, experiences on it. Recently I met one of my friend's brothers who's 49. He's in a technical support role, and he says that the interviews that he has attended in the recent past with large companies, where he believes the interviews have gone well, and I'm sure all of us when we attend interviews say that. But considering that he's at least somebody whom I respect, so from that point of view that he has done interviews well, he said nobody calls him back. So when his own interpretation is somewhere he feels that his age is a suspect. So they don't want to invest in a 49-year-old is what he thinks. I don't know how much of that is true, but that's on one side. So one of my ex-bosses, famously jokes with me that when I ask him, he's 58, and he's just moved another job, and as a MD of a large consulting company. So I ask him, how do you do it? In the last 6 years, this is his third change and in all CXO roles. So how does he, get so many opportunities? He jokes and says, "Look, Kamal, at 45, pick up a company where you can retire. Sorry?
You can retire from there?
Yeah, almost you can retire from there." He said, hold on to the job. Don't antagonize bosses. Don't be, sort of precipitating things. Hold on to the job and retire. That's what he says. But we all know that it's not as easy as said.
True. Very true.
So in the context of aging, if you look at globally, there are some insights.
So I think you look at markets like maybe US, UK, Japan, or even South Korea kind of countries, Kamal. Age has a different connotation. If you're 40s or 50s in some countries, you're considered younger. While in India, for sure, we are beginning to notice that this could be a challenge, isn't it? So when I was working with Japanese company, they found that 55 was a pretty young age for a C-level, and they would give that person clearly 10, 15 years horizon. He could be the CEO for the next 10, 15 years. So I clearly noticed that in Japan, even 50s was considered younger.
No, I think my own experience, the many times that I was in US, I realized that it's also a cultural context and the legal context of the country. I think in country like US, you cannot discriminate based on age.
Absolutely.
So that also comes into play in the work sphere. So I have worked with as a label. And I saw in that country and in that organization, nobody looked at them with the age label.
Right.
Whereas in India, we easily pass comments like he's old, he's that much age. And I think it is okay after an interview, we'll be talking about any job aspirant saying that, oh, he's of so much age.
Right.
Can he travel?
Yeah.
We talk all these things, which in my own experience internationally is almost like a taboo. People never discuss those things.
Right. So age has certain references to being old-fashioned, being not able to deal with technology. Something like, we use this phrase like over the hill kind of terms.
Mm-hmm.
So surely, such conversations can be avoided, in our context, Kamal.
No, absolutely. I think it's a cultural context that we need to sort of move on. There's an interesting study which was published by Karanth.
This is for C-level, obviously.
This is obviously for C-level. One interesting observation, as you can see here, Anil, is that somewhere organizations for C-level are okay. And we are talking here about, Fortune 500 companies, 1,000 US companies by revenue, so they are obviously most reputed companies.
Absolutely.
And here we can see that for a C-level, companies seem to be making an exception. I'm sure they're all big multi-billion-dollar multinational companies. So clearly organizations seem to say that for a C-level role, I don't mind having somebody who's where I don't look at the age.
Right.
I possibly look at expertise. I look at what he or she brings to the table.
Yeah.
But one interesting observation here, Anil, is about CIOs.
Right.
That seems to be the only kind of a job
role,
where
yeah.
Younger people, relatively younger people. I can't say young.
That's true.
And of course, young is in our definition of what we call as young.
Right.
So I think that's the only space where I see that relatively younger people. But by and large, even if you dissect sector-wise, you can see that clearly for C roles, organizations tend to prefer people who have a certain experience.
More tenured and experienced. Yes, that is right.
Yeah.
So there are older CEOs. 55 is not very unusual for C-level CEOs, and across all other layers, we can say the same thing.
Yeah. So I think the exception we tend to make for the C-level roles, why aren't we able to bring it to the next level? So that's a larger question I have.
Right.
In terms of at an organization level. If at all what we are hearing is true, there seems to be that the organizations don't seem to prefer people at the next level in the same category. Right?
Yeah, it's just that the founders are probably getting younger. People who founding companies, there is more propensity of younger people. But when it comes to executive roles, it's the older folks that are doing well.
Yeah, I think if you look at the startup world, they seems to be in a different bubble compared to large enterprises and the so-called traditional companies, if I have to use that word for companies which are in the FMCG category, in construction, manufacturing, where with experience comes expertise, and that seem to be valued even more.
Absolutely.
I have an uncle who's 65 now, retired from a construction company. He's been retained on a contract, and he goes every day to work. He paid the same salary.
Right.
So I think there are certain sectors and certain skills where your experience is not a liability.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is something interesting as well. We came across this where we were looking at skills and the age profile. Surprisingly, if you were to tell the skill of a person, you can probably, you can guess the age. That's the relevance of the slide.
Yeah, I think this is highly specific to the technology world, the IT world that we're familiar with.
Yeah.
And, one of the questions that came to my mind as I looked at this and said that, okay, if there is what is the recent skill that we're talking about here? Let's say it's Bash, and there you see that, people who are relatively younger are possibly in this bracket as we see.
Or let's look Ruby on Rails.
Ruby on Rails.
Which, aren't available in big numbers, but then even if you look at a small sample size of this, you would find that, you can probably guess the age profile of people who are working on it.
So ultimately, Anil, can we say that, look, if some of the skills are recent, like Bash, would you say that even if your age when I say age, let's say, you're still 40 plus, 45 plus, 50 plus.
Yeah.
Would you be considered current if you know this skill?
Absolutely.
Is that the way to go?
Yeah, that's the way to look at it. As you're upgrading, age tends to be overlooked. As you're learning new skills, the slide in a way says that you would be in demand. You would be, landing a good job. That's what it means.
Also in the tech world, is it because, Anil, at least in the Indian context, over a period of time, we've all become managers. We tend to manage large armies, and that's how our own roles have got defined. I manage so many billion-dollar accounts. I manage so many thousand people's delivery center. I'm the VP. I'm the general manager, director. Is that how these skills have got lost? And you think that is what has to come back for you to not only get older, but also stay relevant?
Yeah, in the Indian context, which is more IT services oriented, services in nature, this slide does not refer to that point, Kamal. So in IT services, surely you're growing up the pyramid. You have a large number of people at the coding, development, testing stage, and then you are somewhere moving up the pyramid, and there are supposed to be fewer people there. So this really doesn't talk to that point, Kamal. So in IT service, obviously, you're trying to get more higher up the hierarchy.
Yeah, but that's how also the bell got fatter, isn't it? And one fine day you had to get rid of the people managers.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. So yeah, this is an interesting slide of where we are talking about, in the government, defense forces kind of a thing. But, where people, who spend long years in a certain role, for example, if you're a Havaldar or a Subedar kind of a role, you would tend to be retired, at an early age. Early age is a relatively early age of 52, while if you're going up the ranks, you're becoming a general, you're becoming a lieutenant general, major general, then obviously the retirement age is, later, relatively speaking.
I find this data point very interesting, Anil, because I think this has a direct percolation into the so-called corporate enterprise world, which means that, look, here if you are saying that the RBI governor, he gets to retire at 65, whereas his deputy has to retire 3 years earlier to him.
Yeah.
Him or her.
Yeah.
So similarly, if you're not a Supreme Court judge early enough, then, you have to retire early if you're a High Court judge at 62, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, the premium attached to the scientists, whether it's in agriculture or, medical research, you have to retire early if you don't make it big. The same thing, I think, is sort of
plays out in the corporate world.
Yeah, absolutely. Somewhere unknowingly, knowingly, we seem to have copied what the government and the army have been doing for ages.
Yeah.
And interestingly, if you look at the India story, Anil, that each state has come up with its own age profile. That means that if you really want to get old and still work, you have to move to another state. Possibly,
we are in the right state.
We are in the right state right now because being in Karnataka.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think somewhere corporate India also has caught up with this unknowingly. I don't know whether it's a direct influence of this, but the message is clear that if you don't grow skill-wise or rank-wise fast enough, because we saw also in the earlier data points we presented that if you want to be a CEO, you can still be 55 plus and you'll still be a CEO.
Yeah.
So that means that if you want to stay in the corporate world, and in spite of being of a certain age, you need to grow up the ladder fast.
Yeah.
Which is what even this slides related to the Supreme Court and the RBI.
Yeah, if you're an RBI governor, Fed chief, any of these roles, I think there's a value to wisdom and experience. In some of these roles, at least that's how it is looked at.
Absolutely. And the interesting data point that I wanted to talk to you about is the labor force of India.
Demographics of India.
Demographics of India. You earlier mentioned that 28 is our current median age.
Yeah.
And it is rising. And interestingly, if you look at our urban labor force today, we are talking about a huge surge of people between 25 years plus kind of a people who are actually coming into the workforce.
Right.
So what we talked about earlier in terms of supply, the demographic shift that happened and the supply that India is getting in terms of talent.
The younger workforce.
The younger workforce are getting is also sort of making this age a real problem.
True. You can expect that if you're on the, say, wrong side of 40, you can be out of employment for a fairly long time. If you have lost a job, for example, if you've been laid off, that's what it means. Because you will be replaced by younger workforce, and maybe even in terms of technology and those kind of skills, the people who can adapt to those skills are getting better jobs.
But are we also saying, Anil, that because there is a supply, there's a significant supply of younger talent coming into play.
Right.
Everybody who is above 40 or 45 or 50 needs to worry.
Generally speaking, yes, Kamal. I think that's how you need to plan, your career in such a way that, if you are, looking at a lower job, propensity at the age of 40, 45, You need to plan your career in such a way. You can't assume that you will work till 60.
Let's also see how the demographics of the job are changing. This is the McKinsey study, which was obviously this is a little US centric, but I think it gives a good picture of how the movement of skills is changing from physical to technological skills. If you look at where it was in 2002 to what is projected to be in 2030, we are talking about a huge dip in terms of what is physical and manual skills.
Right.
Where we have to accept automation today,
Yeah.
and the cognitive skills and the physical and manual skills almost getting eliminated, to that extent.
Yeah.
And where high cognitive skills, emotional skills and social skills and technological skills seem to be the place people are going, which means that if you don't retain your skills, you sort of going to become obsolete in that context.
Yeah.
And if you don't invest on higher social and emotional skills, and if you don't know, there are two things here. One is if you don't learn to work with machines and robots, for example, or two, you do not really understand and work as a technologist.
Right.
You are pretty much, the percentage of jobs available in the remaining category, the physical, manual, and basic cognitive skills are almost disappearing. So from that point of view, you can age by not having a skill than just by aging.
Absolutely. How many ads have you seen, Kamal, where people are saying that we need digital natives? That's another, word being used for people who can adapt to technology, who can keep learning new skills, technology skills, and who can work with machines.
There are all these ads and the discussions we are seeing around us saying that older people cannot actually learn new technologies? Or are there only certain sectors in which we are seeing this bias, Anil?
Well, it is a serious problem where the industry hasn't innovated extensively over the last maybe a few decades.
Industry or individuals?
Industry, and because of those where individuals have been working there. You've noticed that in some of the older banks in India, Kamal, who did not, go through the same technology upgradation that some of the private banks went through. People were given voluntary, retirement. They were given options so that they could leave the workforce. And those were, the banks became leaner. You would have noticed that. So it is to do with the industry, but the people who spend long years in the industry obviously would have adapted to those, environment and not been able to upgrade skills.
Yeah, because I find it funny because technology industry is the one which has been leading this, discussion, talk around age, where somewhere this implicit meaning of skill, meaning the innovation is far more associated with the younger workforce than the older workforce. So that is how the technology industry is doing. But if you look at one of the industry where innovation is at the forefront is pharmaceutical industry, where expertise is actually valued, where only after a certain age you're able to go through the innovation path, get patents, and we know that it takes 10 to 15 years to come with the innovative drug.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think a cutting edge technology, which the IT talks about, and the cutting edge technology that pharmaceutical companies tend to discover, they're on two sides of the coin when it comes to age.
They are, but then the people working in these industries, I'm sure, are quite aware that they need to also upgrade. If you're certainly in R&D and other functions, constant reading and learning, and watching the developments of those industries are extremely critical as a part of your work. Same thing with IT companies.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the age brackets of the services company CEOs and the technology product companies age group who lead, niche marquee companies in India.
Right.
There seems to be that services companies really don't care what is the age group of the CEOs.
Yeah.
Where I can say that they are in the early and late 50s, whereas these marquee technology product companies seem to have CEOs in their early 40s.
Sure.
So there seems to be a pattern.
So we are just giving out some thoughts on what talent can do. We're really not getting into what companies, what companies need to do to be able to accommodate, more tenured and seasoned workforce. So that's the scope of our conversation today, Kamal.
Yeah, I think we're not talking about what enterprises should do. So with that,
let's take some questions. So thank you, for people who have sent us some of the questions, and we'll just go over them. Maybe we've answered some of them as we progressed through our earlier, talk.
Especially the first question, I think, we talked about what is the reason that companies today are discriminating on the basis of age. I think we talk about the context of the role skill per se,
Yeah.
where it is the talent supply, the demographic shift that we are seeing. And in some of the contexts, we are also seeing the cost of the role coming into play. So those are the three dimensions in which we believe the discrimination is happening, if at all.
Sure. So there's another question, Kamal, whether 40 is the new normal. Again, we touched upon it, but I would say that maybe it's not the new normal, but it's something for you to contend with and plan your career in such a way that if your chances of landing a job are going to be slim after 40, what do I do? How do I prepare for such a future? That's a conversation that you certainly need to have with yourself,
including planning your finances, not buying, committing to new EMIs, houses, at that age.
Yeah.
So those are the other.
So we can talk from experience, Kamal. We did those blunders.
Yeah. I think the other question, Anil, is about us. Have we placed people? In fact, the first placement we did was for a 52-year-old gentleman. So not too many at this point of time. Xpheno's business model today, largely our direct hire business is about
is working with startups.
Working with startups where our average age is in the I would say 35 plus, and within 40. That's the range in which most of the work that we have done.
True. So
not too many, but over the last 2 decades, a lot of work we have done in terms of placing people.
Yeah, C-level we certainly would have placed, but then maybe across other positions we may not have done too much of work.
Question number 4, which is about somebody has asked specific the question to them. I would answer them with the question number 5. If you want to, let's say, go and meet a founder and say, I want a leadership role, he or she is likely to say, there is no role. You have to create your role. So then the answer is, what is your attitude?
Right.
You don't go to a startup and say, what is my role? I want to be a co-founder. I want to be a COO. Those roles happen, so over a period of time. So that's what I would tell for whosoever has asked that question.
Yeah. Does age matter? If one's physically fit and mentally strong? Well, yes and no. I mean, depends on what role are you getting into. But surely being physically fit is a big advantage. I mean, in the corporate world, you can extend your career by a few more years, if not.
I don't know. I disagree. It's a misnomer according to me. You can look fit. What does that mean? It's all, again, in the bias of whosoever is considering you, whether it's your manager, your CEO, or whosoever is interviewing you in case of interviews.
Right.
Because I distinctly remember for one sales role, a company said, look, I want somebody who's, let's say, early 40s.
Right.
They clearly mentioned that.
Yeah.
Your sales role, it has travel, I want energy. Somewhere they thought energy comes with youth. We met somebody and we thought, he actually fitted the bill.
Yeah.
And we said, we request the guy with the company to actually meet him. He was 54.
Yeah.
The energy, the way he brought himself in, the solutions he was giving, his expertise, experience was unmatched. Only after they met, they said, yeah, this is the guy we wanted to hire. So sometimes we all live in our own, blocks.
Yeah, that's what we call by bias.
Yeah, that's the bias. Yeah,
that's exactly the bias that we're talking about. But age, may not really relate to the persona the person has. You may bring in a lot of energy, which is not necessarily connected to the age. So yeah, that's
who you are. Who you are, like we say, that your attitude makes the difference. The question number 5 is the answer for all of us. All we want to say today is, because we're only talking about you as a talent and not what enterprise should do, is don't become obsolete. It looks a little preachy to say, but clearly, find a way to stay relevant. Most difficult skills, do come in a discomfort zone. So put yourself in the discomfort zone and stay relevant with that, and don't become a dinosaur.
Yeah, thank you for joining us in today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.